I request everyone if you can kindly turn on your cameras if possible, at least for the first session. So just in 1 minute, please. Okay, so thank you very much. My name is Tahir Masood Qureshi. I'm responsible to do the host activity for this event today.
Yeah, we can hear you, sir. Go ahead.
You can hear me? Okay, great.
Yes, it's fine.
Just I'm trying to, okay, here you go. Yes, I formally welcome everybody in the GCBMS 8th event. I remember the time when we started these conferences in 2006. At that time, it was pretty hard to go ahead and communicate to the researchers, but over the time, the team became specialized to contact to you all. And events like this one becomes always successful when there are high-level intellects and they contribute their research contribution, what they have done in front of people. Once we bring the contributions, obviously it gives benefit not only to the academicians, but also the industry. In this conference, we have received 325 research.
Pause, please.
Yeah. After the blind review process, 130 research articles are selected, and these articles will be presented by the research scholars from 30 different countries into 21 different sessions over the 2 days' time. This activity is a joint effort of University of Bolton and Academy of Business Management conferences. I remember the time when COVID was spreading a few years back. At that time, we shifted the on-site activities to the online, and we have seen the overwhelming response. And in on-site, probably we used to have like 50, 55 people, but now the number is crossing to 130. And altogether, including the industry invites, there are 250 people who will be joining this event over 2 days' time. Different sessions, including marketing, finance, human resource, logistics and supply chain, psychology, leadership, and accounting and finance, obviously the most important. These papers will be, these research contributions and paper will be presented by the scholars. And those people who are going to send their final scripts after getting the feedback from the session chairs, those papers will be considered for the peer review process in different journals, which are at the platform of the conference for the possible publications after the review process. So conference secretariat will communicate to the researchers after this event in next week. Without taking more time, let me invite our conference co-chair, who is serving at the University of Bolton, Ras Al-Khaimah campus as a director, for his welcome quick note. And let me I would like to add on in his introduction. He has served as a director in a previous university where he has contributed to make the institution recognized by the AACSB. And he has served in the academic sector, and he has also served in the industrial sectors, related with the research, related with the analysis. And he is also the prominent scholar and speaker related with the research activities in the Middle East. And I would like to welcome Dr. Azim to give a welcome note.
Yeah, so, Dr. Tahir, you made me proud today. All right, ladies and gentlemen.
But I just given you half of your introduction, not complete.
Yeah, exactly. All right, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues and students and distinguished guests. It is indeed my pleasure to welcome you all here in the 8th Global Conference of Business Management and Social Science. By looking at the participation, of course, we are very pleased. And we have put a lot of passion in shaping the conference, and it will take us closer to our goal. And the goal is to develop the research profile and culture of knowledge sharing at our institution in the academic center, Ras Al-Khaimah. At present, we are offering a wide range of degree programs in business and engineering at undergraduate and graduate level. Now we will be the official center of University of Bolton for PhD programs. And this program will be supervised by 2 professors from the University of Bolton, UK. At present, 7 PhD scholars are completing their degrees, and another batch of 11 candidates is going to start from September 2022. Besides, we are also offering a postgraduate certificates for faculty and teaching professionals to obtain UK teaching credentials. So I welcome you all and thank you very much for your presence and making our event successful. Over to you, Dr. Tahir. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Azim. Now I would like to call Dr. Zubair, who is a provost at the University of Bolton, UK. He has a career over 40 years of experience. His specializations include the numerical engineering analysis and software development, project management, and the leadership. He is also a prominent scholar, and he contributed a lot into the establishment of different institutions in different parts of the world. Currently, he is a UK-based and running a good brand as a leader, and we will definitely be interested to listen him and his experience. And he is also serving as a guide to the UAE campus for the University of Bolton. Dr. Zubair, hand over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Tahir, Dr. Azim. First of all, thank you very much for having me. I really welcome the opportunity. I want to start by just, really getting a poll to see if we all understand the value of education and how education is there to help people to transform their lives. So the first poll I want to do, and it's really just a show of hands, I think you can use the technology. The first poll I'd like to do is, I'd like to ask if you consider students as customers in a university or not. So if you consider students as customers, can you put your hand up now to say, yes, I think they are customers? I just want to see how many people believe they are customers. And if the technology allows me, if somebody who's hosting this can give me some sort of a count of how many people have put their hands up. So if you think students are customers, please put your hand up. Because I think this is quite important in what I'm about to say, really. So I can see probably 4 people. Is that okay?
4, 2, and I think 2 and 4.
Sorry,
5, no, it's
6,
7.
5, 7.
Yeah, it's coming up.
Okay. Any more? Okay, it's growing. It's growing. Yeah. So I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
11, 12.
Okay. 11, 12, 13.
So we
okay, about
10%.
about 15 people. So out of the 70 people, 15 people have said they see customers. Okay. Now I want you to remove your hand if you've already voted. Please remove your hand. Okay, so it's clear. Now I want you, if you don't see students as customers, to put your hand up. Now, technically, if the numbers work out, it should be 55, but it may, some may be in between. So put your hand up if you don't see students as customers. And I think this is quite important because what I'm about to say, hopefully, will give some credence to this particular conference as well. So I have 2, 3. Oh, not many. 3, 4, 5. Okay. So about 5. Okay. So I take that there are 50 people undecided. Okay, that's not a problem. And there is some sense to this madness. Okay. So okay, why, you know, some people see students as customers, some people see students as not customers in higher education. Okay, there's no right or wrong answer. One fundamental thing I will say to you is students should be treated equally as well as you would treat a customer. So if I was to check into a hotel, you know, obviously they'd welcome me, they give me the room card. I know exactly what I need to do, i.e. check in, go to my room, you know, my luggage is bought. I know some of the nuances of the hotel. Now, the same in education. I think education is only successful if we put the framework together, which helps people to succeed. I personally don't believe we should see students as customers, and I'll tell you why. The day we see students as customers, we will drop standards in a sense, okay? Students are really a bit like how the aircraft industry functions. If you look at the aircraft industry, they take on raw materials. They treat their raw material very well, because if there's a defect, they want to make sure it's not, you know, it's not up to the standard at this stage. Let us, sorry to say, reject. So that's our admissions policy in a university. So the raw materials coming in, we check for defects. If you have the right credentials, you come in. We then bash and shape that raw material, i.e. we give tuition, we give support to the students, and we make aeroplanes. And then we have an air show where we sell the aeroplanes. So in a university, we take the students, we bash, i.e. with knowledge, we bash them, and we create a situation where we create graduates. And at the graduation ceremony, what we do is we sell our students to society. So society really is the customer of university. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay. And I think that is a very fundamental thinking to what we feel is the value of education. Now, at the University of Bolton, we have a very clear strategy. Okay. We have obviously campuses across the globe. We have academic centers. We have partnerships. And we are very selective in who we partner with, because they have to understand what we are about. University of Bolton has a strategy which is based on what we call teaching intensive and research informed. Research plays a part in our development, in our thinking, because any university, the sole purpose of a university is to create new knowledge and to disseminate that knowledge. Otherwise, we might as well just be a college. A college is only there to disseminate the knowledge. University is there to create the new knowledge as well. So at my university, we are fixated in being teaching intensive and research informed. That's why for the last 17 years, in, if you like, the office of our president and the vice chancellor, we've been very careful in who we recruit to put them in front of our students. And in every interview panel that I chair, I make sure the people who are going to be the lecturers and the tutors and the support staff, certainly the lecturers have to have two things, in my opinion. They have to have really good subject knowledge, and that's fundamental, but also the ability to disseminate that knowledge. How many times have we been in a lecture and we listen to some individual who may be very, very bright in their field, but they have no ability to disseminate that knowledge? Can you see? And that really is a problem. That's a problem because it doesn't support the students. It doesn't get the best out of students. And I think that's very important. I have seen some exceptional teaching in very poor quality environment. And I've seen some of the worst teaching in state-of-the-art lecture theaters. So I think it's fundamental that we understand we have a responsibility for our students, our society, that we put in front of our students exceptional people. And I think you must all be, because you're here at this conference, okay, because you're interested. And that interest is the first step to that. The other thing is our center or our campus in Ras Al-Khaimah is very, very special to us. Why has the University of Bolton set sail into the Middle East, went across to Ras Al-Khaimah to put all the effort in? Because I was posted out there in 2008, and I was part of the development team with the Vice Chancellor in establishing that campus. I held the position of principal and academic director for that campus. Now, we are very passionate about our achievement there, because what it does, it gives British education to people who may still want to continue to work and live in the Middle East, who may want to, for one reason or another, they may have family commitment, they may have jobs, to actually set sail to come to the UK to get a UK degree could be problematic. So we thought it's a good idea to give a UK degree out in the Middle East, and that's what we're doing. And our campus is quality assured by our off-campus division. And I think some of you who work in the campus know that from time to time, they come with a ton of paperwork to do. They want to monitor, they want to audit, and so on. And yes, it's stressful. There's a lot of bureaucracy, but it helps in the continual enhancement of what we are trying to project across to our students. We, in the University of Bolton, we're very, very proud because the Ras Al-Khaimah campus, we call it the RAC campus, is now set on its final evolution of the strategy. Our strategy was to start the campus, start to offer some undergraduate programs. Then as we progressed, we wanted to offer postgraduate programs. Then we wanted to embark on research and consultancy and training. Now we have come to our pinnacle, if you like, for the campus, which is a PhD center that is about to be launched at the Ras Al-Khaimah campus. This will give an opportunity for people who live and work in the Middle East to undertake a PhD without coming to the UK. So they get a UK accredited PhD, a research degree, if you like, from the University of Bolton, which is part of the campus. Now, I'm very proud that you are here and that you've asked me to do the keynote address. I wanted to signal the purpose of education, and I hope I've done that, because I see students, like I say, as raw materials. It doesn't mean we don't treat them well. We have to, because they are paying people. They're not quite customers, but we treat them equally well as we would treat a customer. We have to give them the best teaching and the best experience so they can fulfill their potential. How you do that, it differs from each subject, and you are masters in your particular subject. So if you're teaching dance and drama, and if you're teaching applied mechanics, you have to do it in a very different way. Okay, so it's not a one size fit all. Also, it's important to be able to differentiate in education. So we get a class of 30, 40, 50 students. There may be some students who may excel, and some students who may find that class quite a challenge. And I think certainly in the UK, we practice differentiation in a very good way, where we give challenges and stretch to those who find it reasonably comfortable. But in doing so, we also try and support the people who need to be brought up to that level. And I always say in my teaching, I've always strived for the normal distribution curve. Obviously, I want everybody to pass, but I think you can see the majority of people will be center stage. And that's, that's life, because not everybody can be David Beckham and Usain Bolt, but most people can at least achieve what I call a normal distribution, be there in the middle. So that's my keynote address. I really wish this conference well. I think you've got some great people lined up, and I hope you have a great couple of days. By the way, I was in Ras Al-Khaimah on Monday. It was great to return. We had a football match between Bolton Wanderers youth team and Emirates Football Club. Some of you may have read this, and the good news is Bolton 1. So I'm going to leave you now, and I hope that's sufficient for my keynote address. Thank you.
Yeah. Dr. Zubair,
Thank you.
Just a moment. Dr. Taib, would you like to invite Dr. Zubair again to open the conference formally?
Yes, sir, please, Dr. Zubair.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Tahir. I formally open this conference, and I wish you well in your endeavors.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zubair. So if you allow, can I open the session for a few questions from the audience?
Sure.
So anyone, if you have any kind of question, please go ahead. Let's take the liberty of Dr. Zubair's presence here.
You can raise your hand. We can then catch you from here.
Come on, guys, I don't bite. There's a lady there. Hi, she's called Webinar, I guess.
Yeah, actually, this is Mamuna. Yeah, Mamuna she's director schools in Malaysia.
Oh, hi, Mamuna. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much. When I raised my hand for your question that the students are client, I did not have that perspective in your, what you said. What I meant was that the students are supposed to be treated very nicely. Their needs have to be looked into. And especially when you talk about differentiation, we do not want to teach students with the same methodology. So when we have to differentiate, it requires a lot of hard work and a lot of teacher training. So if it is not served, then we feel that we have not done our part, so we have not served the clients well. So what would you say about that? That perspective?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and I think I accept your stance to say, when I say, do you treat students as clients? Obviously, the treatment, they're human beings, and you treat all human beings with equal respect and dignity and so on. And I think that goes without saying. My specific point is, there are some cultures and some societies that, because students are paying a fee, they will see those as they're always right. It's the concept, the American concept, which is horrible. The customer is always right. And that's not education. To me, higher education is, there is a service, there is a transformational opportunity. Let's face it, this is, because of higher education or education in general, I feel my life has been transformed. I have a lovely family, I have a nice house, and I think that's all because of education. I won't have the job I have, I won't earn the salary I do. Now, your specific question is, yes, it's hard to differentiate. And how do we do this? Well, again, it depends on the subject. I'm a mathematician, and the way, and I've taught for many years mathematics to engineers. And in engineering, you do get the very, very bright, but sometimes you do get some people who want to do engineering and struggle with mathematics. Okay, so I used to grade my tutorial questions accordingly. In all my topics, I used to have 20 tutorial questions per topic. I used to say to the students, the first 5 tutorial questions you will do with your eyes closed, because it's fairly straightforward. If you've just been to 1 or 2 of my classes, you will be able to answer them. The next 5 will require a little bit of work. You have to remember what you've been taught, what you've done in the class. The next 5 starts to stretch you. And if you can answer the last 5, the questions 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, I want to invite you to join me on the stage. That's what I used to say, because they were challenging. Okay. Now, I know it's easy said than done when you present that. A lot of students, particularly in different cultures, they want to do all 20. And if they struggle, they want the answer. And I used to say, well, you can have the answer, but the problem is it won't develop you. You can give answers to certain problems in mathematics, but you need to do mathematics to be able to practice, to be able to finesse, to get to where you need to get to. I hope that's answered your question, but there are multiple schools of thought, and that's my view on this.
I've got some more.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for asking question, and Dr. Zubair for your detailed answer. Just one more question, considering the time limitation, then we will move towards the first keynote. Dr. Imad, your hand is up. In case if you have a question, please go ahead. Arusman.
No, Dr. Imad is joining. Is he connecting? Again?
Okay. So whoever can ask. Yes.
Sorry, Doctor. Yeah,
No
thank you, Dr. Zubair, for this introduction. Actually, I like it. So my question is now, okay, maybe it's regarding the pandemic. You know, now students, they will live, let's say, after the pandemic. Do you believe the students' performance academically, they will be before academic the same or not? Or they will be like different? Yeah. This is really actually, a very important question, because the students used to, during the past 2 years, okay, they have everything to be online, and maybe interaction will be online.
Thank you for the question. Dr. Imad, quickly, very brief introduction of yours for Dr. Zubair.
Yeah, my name is Dr. Imad. I'm from the Montfort University, Dubai campus here in Dubai. So I'm teaching psychology under the psychology program, senior lecturer in psychology.
Thank you, sir.
That points me to the fact that that's the rationale why you've asked that question. Yes, I think obviously the pandemic has changed the game completely. Okay. I think, you know, what the pandemic has done, it has transformed universities, because up until the pandemic, let's face it, certainly in England, we spent almost 1,000 years doing the things in the same way. And that is, we enroll students, we give them a timetable, we ask them to attend lectures, we set up tutorials, we set up laboratories depending on the subject. And a lot of it was basically face-to-face, to say that interaction. Now, your question was, would they perform worse or better, you know, if you start involving the delivery through Zoom and digital means? Now, I think it really depends. I think if you are maybe a postgraduate student, if you are, you know, if you have the ability to learn by yourself, and really take on the subject matter and sort of be organized, then I think it matters not whether it's digital or face-to-face. I mean, we are here, sort of people from all over the world are engaging, and hopefully we are learning, we are exchanging ideas. And I think, you know, that said, I think there are some students who don't like the idea. They want that face-to-face interaction. They want to have a physical presence. So I think it's difficult to answer your questions. I would say on the postgraduate side, I think their achievement and their success won't have been impacted that much. I think on the undergraduate, yeah. But what's more important is not their ability to achieve. What's important is the mental stress the pandemic has created. And I think, Dr. Imad, you probably relate to this, because there's a lot of work out there to say the pandemic has caused severe heartache and stress. And, you know, there are mental pressures of being locked in lockdown, not being able to engage with people and so on. I think the university of the future will be different. And the pandemic, what it's done, it's accelerated our thinking. The 1,000-year sort of convention has now flipped a little bit. And we have found, and Zoom and Teams have been great tools, because before the pandemic, we thought, oh, well, it's there, video conferencing, but we never really used it. Then we had to use it. And it's the same thing. It's necessity is the mother of invention. So I see the future to be a bright future for higher education, provided each and every university understands that we can do a lot digitally, but there's also the mental issue where we have to bring people together. And I think there is a lot of scope for digital synchronous delivery, i.e. real-time delivery. So it's still structured like this is, you know, rather than saying to a student, just go online, look at a recording and you'll understand, because they never understand like this, or at least I don't. I like to at least engage in real time, okay? And also, even though you're doing what I call the digital synchronous delivery, you also need time, maybe not as much time, for people to come together. So you may create a timetable where maybe 40% of your face-to-face teaching is now done through digital synchronous delivery, and the 60% is more practical and workshop based, where you're bringing people together. And sometimes you want activities, because learning need not be just sitting there. Learning can be, for example, we did a conference called Kinematics, which was for engineering. And a lot of the learning was going on a trail of discovery. So we wanted groups of students to go and discover things and understand what they're discovering, where we had various artifacts and and sort of things placed, apparatus placed, so where they had to go and touch and feel and understand and then come back and report. And that's a form of learning as well, because that's learning through play. And I think everybody experienced that. If you have children, we ourselves, when we were young, we learned a lot through play. I mean, I have two grandsons, by the way, and my eldest grandson, Noah, is 5. And I know he's learning a lot through play, because when he sees me, we play what he calls school. And the way we play school, I ask his toys some questions. His toys will answer, but he's answering for the toy. Do you understand? And it's incredible, because he says it's the Blaze car that's answering, but he's speaking on behalf of the Blaze car. And so there are different ways. So sorry, I've digressed a little bit, but just going back to your question, I think it's a fundamental question. Pandemic has transformed lives. It really depends. I think for the postgraduate students, I think this digital learning is fine, because they're self-motivated. For the undergrads, I think they need a little bit more sort of face-to-face intervention.
Dr. Zubair, thank you very much. And you're right, the future of education is going to be changed. And induction of toys to teach the kids, that's a good addition. Now, I would like to move to our first keynote speaker of the day, Dr. Kareem Abdullah. Kareem Abdullah, are you here, sir?
Yeah.
Oh, great, lovely. Let me introduce you first to the people. Kareem Abdullah is an Emeritus Professor of Financial Econometrics at Imperial College London and Honorary Senior Fellow of RCEA. He obtained his PhD from Oxford University, his MA Economics and VA from the American University, where he also held the post of Distinguished Visiting Professor on a few occasions. He started his academic career as a lecturer in economics in Lincoln College, Oxford. He then joined the University of Exeter as a senior lecturer in statistics and econometrics, then reader. He held the chair of econometrics and statistics position at the University of York, joint between the Department of Mathematics and Economics, then the chair of financial econometrics at the Business School of Imperial College London. He is credited with having solved in his PhD a long-standing problem in mathematical statistics, great contribution, and the time series that was open since 1950. He also predicted the timing of 2008 recession in a year advance. Wow, that's great. So we would like to have your predictions today about the future. And then the different timings of the recoveries from the various Western countries. He also predicted the recent stagflation on the Tutor and in an article in International Banker recently in summer 21. Sir, hand over to you. You have contributed a lot into the academic sector. Thank you very much for that. And you give it the solution for the real life problems to the industries.
Thank you, Dr. Qureshi. If you can put me as co-host, then I can share my screen. I have some slides to show.
Sure, please. Troy Frederick, can you please help us?
Yeah, that's happening. Yep. Right. Okay. Can you all see the slides?
Yes, sir, we can see it.
Okay, great. Right, so Dr. Qureshi, thank you very much for the introduction, and this is basically what I'm going to talk about. What are we facing next, and where is it coming from? Because I can tell you my prediction of what we're facing next, but I need to also tell you where it's coming from, and this is where I agree with Dr. Zubair that mathematics is very important, because even though I'm not going to go into it today, it's at the background of everything I've done in this context. So the questions we have is, we've seen a great recession in 2008, and we're still living with the legacy of quantitative easing ad infinitum that is only now starting to be withdrawn. And we need to ask ourselves a few questions. Was the recession and the different recoveries predictable? And I think Dr. Qureshi actually gave you the secret. Yes, it was. But more importantly, could we have done something about it? And are there lessons to be learned for the next time? Because the next time is now, basically. And what is the prediction about the post-pandemic dynamics, and how is that affected by the war in Ukraine? Is it going to be a stagnation or a recession, in addition to the inflation that we already know has happened? So the history of this was basically, again, summarized by the kind introduction. The crisis and the timing of the crisis, that's more important. You can always say there's a crisis coming, but if you can get the timing right, that is important. Were predicted ahead of time, both at the Bank of England and in the lecture that I gave a year and a half after, or 2 years after I joined Imperial. And at the time I said that recession would happen if the US doesn't reduce interest rates, and it would be transmitted to the rest of the world. And similarly, I talked about the recoveries and the diverging fortunes of various countries, especially Western countries, in a talk at my home university, American University in Cairo, a year and a half, or yeah, let's say a year after the crisis started. And I said that the US will recover first within a year, but Europe will take a long time to recover. So these things don't come out of thin air. They come out of mathematics, basically, mathematical economics, because mathematics without economics is not very useful. It's useful in physics, but not in economics. So this is based on work that I had in the Review of Economic Studies with my co-author and friend, Professor Gabriel Talmat, and with a former PhD student to follow up. His name is Giovanni Caggiano. He's a professor in Australia now. That was in the Journal of Econometrics. And there are a few other articles. So why do we need all these complicated things? Well, policymakers need to be able to read the data. And now more than ever, the data is difficult to read. Because if you want to act not just in good time, but also in the right proportion, and I'll come back to that because I don't think we are doing either correctly at the moment, we need to have good glasses, so to speak, to be able to read what the data is saying. And our model is these glasses that allow us to see what's going on. They indicate that when there's a change that's happening through a system, it looks initially like it's slow, happening slowly, but actually there's an acceleration that happens all of a sudden, and an abrupt magnification that follows. The models that are used in econometrics, economics, finance are not up to that because they cannot cope with these patterns. The models that we have are typically small change happens, we adjust our predictions by small bits, and is unable to predict the substantial turning point that is going to happen. So initially, whatever shock hits the economy seems to have little impact. And I'll give you an example. Suppose you have an oil shock like now, and a closed factory is not going to be badly affected as much as a steel factory or energy intensive industry. But then when the energy intensive industry reacts by closing down the factory and laying off the workers, and these workers are spending less on clothing, everybody feels eventually the pinch. And this takes 6 months to a year to be discovered. So everybody will feel this problem eventually. And these interactions don't appear at the aggregate level immediately. So if you just look at the data, at the aggregate level, as a central banker or as a government, you're not able to detect what is happening. And it builds into something bigger than what we initially thought. But this delay is also a blessing in disguise, because you can see what's happening at the micro level, and as a result, you're able to have an early warning system that you didn't have before. What are the implications for policymakers if a policy intervention is needed, for example, to slow down inflation or to stimulate growth? It should be timed well before the turning point. It will take a long time to have an impact, 6 months to a year, I mentioned, and it should be sufficiently proportionate or aggressive to achieve the aims. And you should stop before you actually reach that aim, because otherwise you will overshoot. So a gradualist policy like what we're seeing now is too little too late. And for example, if you wait for inflation to hit, and inflation to hit as badly as we've seen it, then you're way too late to react. The Federal Reserve Board only yesterday raised interest rates by 0.25%, a quarter. It's nothing, it's a joke. So what are we facing now? I already predicted stagflation, which is a combination of two dreaded things, stagnation and inflation. Dreaded because stagnation is pushing you to ease policy and make it more accommodating, but inflation is asking you to do the opposite. And the origins are from some time ago. They're not fresh. And after the article that I wrote this past summer, basically GDP and inflation swapped. Initially, GDP growth was like 7%, and shortly after it became 2%. That's US GDP, by the way. And inflation jumped quite dramatically, and we're still seeing that. So what was the trajectory we were on before? Because again, if I'm talking about mathematics and where it's leading us, I have to look at the past to be able to model what's moving and how it's moving in the economy. Western economies were not doing that well. They were growing very slowly before the pandemic. Then the pandemic hit, and there was a shock, and this shock is never going to be positive. Yes, there's going to be some redistribution from sectors that are becoming less relevant. Like Dr. Zubair was saying, there's some now developments that are taking place in high tech and other things that have become mainstream. There's a movement away from old economy to new economy. It's not new growth, it's not additional growth, it's just a redistribution. And the shock was a negative shock, and the impact is not going to be positive on growth. We have to remember this. And the figures released yesterday about retail sales in the US crashing, basically, that is further proof that the economies of the West are crashing. So GDP is barely back to before the pandemic, after all the stimulus we've given it. And the disruptions from COVID and the war and so on made the inflation much worse. And see how much time I've got. So I'm afraid we're stuck in a low growth regime, plus we have new additional inflation concerns. I'm going to skip most of the next two slides. I just want to say that ultra easy money for a very long time since the 2008 crisis has resulted in firms existing that shouldn't really have existed. And Schumpeter, a famous Austrian economist, classical, from a long time ago, had a very catchy phrase, creative destruction. A recession has a cleaning effect, cleansing effect. It gets rid of the firms that are really not productive and holding up resources, whether it's labor resources or physical resources, capital and so on. And a recession cleans that up and releases it to new ideas, new firms. And this has not happened because we've made money ultra easy, especially by using it in the pandemic to even buy junk bonds in some cases. So I'm going to skip all this. I want to jump to now. What is happening now is unfortunately really dreadful. Human suffering. but it also has very important economic consequences. The shock that we've had to the prices, and I'm not just talking about the prices of energy and the supplies of various commodities, key commodities that are coming out of Russia and Ukraine, food commodities that are industrial commodities, they are going to last. And even when the oil price returns to something close to normal, which it will eventually do, this shock is a big shock, and it will not be washed out of the system that quickly. My growth predictions that I gave earlier initially were of stagnation in Europe and the US. Now, as stagnation, I define as something around 1%, somewhere between 0 and 2%, basically. I would say now is my prediction is of an outright recession in Europe, and the US, depending on what fiscal policy does, and fiscal policy in the US has been more responsive, and that's why they get out of the trouble quicker than Europe. And depending on what the US fiscal policy does, either we have a stagnation in the US, as in low growth, or we have an outright recession. So I cannot tell you exactly about the US, depends on what they do in the immediate reaction to the current war and its implications. We learned lessons in the 1970s, and we knew what we should have done in the 1970s. And this time I'm warning that we should not do exactly as we would have reacted in the 1970s. In the 1970s, the situation was different. This time, we should keep fiscal policy accommodative. We should have a supportive fiscal policy, unlike what I would have recommended in the 1970s. But the monetary policy, as I hinted earlier, should have been tightened a long time ago. And monetary policy has been far too easy and has been encouraging all sorts of asset price bubbles, whether it's stock market, whether it's housing market, all these things that have been triggered by ultra easy money have to be reversed immediately. And my view is that we should raise rates by not a quarter of a percentage point, but half point. And I think we should do it immediately. We're already very late. And I would say 1.5% is what we need to increase as soon as possible. Maybe 3 rises of 0.5%. And the reason I say 3 interest rate increases as opposed to just one shot, 1% or something like this is there is some uncertainty in how things go in terms of fiscal policy. Well, central banks are supposed to be independent, so fiscal policy is not under their control. But also in terms of how the world economy behaves and the war taking place. So,
please mute, please some participant, mute yourself. Thank you. Go ahead, Dr. Abdul. Please go ahead. Yeah, Dr. Kareem, please go ahead. Your mic is not mute. Your mic is mute. Please unmute it.
How much time have I got now?
Yeah. Thank you, sir. It's fine. It's fine. Go ahead, please.
How much time have I got left?
You have 5 more minutes.
Okay, good.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, stock prices are inflated, and in spite of the correction that has happened recently, stock prices are still inflated. An economy that grows around 2% per annum for the past decade, let's say, cannot be in sync with a stock market that grows at 16% per annum. That's not right. They should grow in tandem because the firm's capitalization reflects the economy. And you cannot have growth of the economy that's only 2% while the stock market is growing year after year at around 16%.
And when you have realized
a major correction is due, and it's more likely to be a sudden one than a gradual one now. Small investors are trapped in this market. Now they've started exiting that and going into Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, and that's even more dangerous. And unfortunately, they're using that as a backup or as a collateral to borrow more money to speculate even more. And that's a recipe for disaster because they're highly leveraged. And when interest rates start going up, as they should do, they're going to have margin calls. They're going to have to liquidate positions that have big losses. And then you get basically downward spiral in the prices of all these things. And this will have an effect, a wealth effect on the consumer because they will have less wealth to back up their consumption, and it will affect national income. So unfortunately, the time for gradual correction is gone. So unless they exit quickly, there's going to be serious trouble in terms of the stock market reaction. Our implications for policy, for monetary policy, is that the central banks should have withdrawn stimulus a long time ago. I've called for that when I was at the Federal Reserve Board in DC in 2018. Now it's way too late, 4 years later, or 3.5 years later. We are really late with that. And COVID never created a credit availability. COVID was a problem about supply chains, supply availability, demand availability for customers, consumers who didn't have access to incomes that they had while they were working. So unfortunately, monetary policy created bubbles, price inflation and speculation. Initially, quantitative easing went into the financial sector, largely confined to that, but when you started buying junk bonds as a central bank, that was not a good idea. And making easy money for everybody is leaked into the real economy, not just the financial markets, the financial sector. When you have inflation that lasts more than a year or approximately a year, it gets factored into indexation of the wages, for example, of menus, menu prices, it's called in economics, and it gives itself a wage price spiral and a spiral of prices that keeps going up. And we have just passed that point. So really, we should have been more aggressive in trying to stop this. This is going to have a big effect if we raise interest rates fast on expectations and on inflated asset prices, and much less on a viable firm. The viable firm is not going to go bankrupt if interest rates go up by 1%, for example. It's big time now to actually go and do this. And I want to leave you with a slide of the stock markets versus the fundamental value. So the fundamental value is the orange line on the stock market just before the correction that's happened recently is the blue line. And you can see the divergences of historic proportions. The stock market has gone absolutely crazy, I have to say. I'm sorry. So I'm expecting even more correction than is currently happening in the stock market. And that's my final slide. Happy to take questions now.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Abide. Now the session is open for the questions, please.
Okay, Dr. Tair, can I start with my question?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Kareem. You presented the great analysis. I want to slightly go out of the scope of your discussion, but it is connected somehow. My hypothesis is actually connecting the pandemic and its influence on the supply chain driven cost push inflation. And I tried to bring one the moderator, which is the free trade zone discussion. So don't you think what I assume that if we have the wider free trade zone, the impact of pandemic would be lesser. What the impact we see, the shocks are more due to the shorter scope of the free trade zone in the world.
Right. So first of all, can you still see my slides?
Yes.
Okay. So I put up a slide about the pandemic impact, and I didn't go through it for time limitations. I'll leave it there if you want to, if people want to read it. I agree with you that free trade is always helpful and gives more flexibility. So things can move from one place to another capacity is available from different places. But the problem is that with the pandemic and the shortages that have happened, we were going to have them regardless. And this was going to be a one-off disruption. And this disruption is now being eased in the sense that the real problem is not the supply chain anymore. The supply chain was a shock. It was a shock because we had just-in-time production. We had very efficient, but also very vulnerable supply chains, and anything could move them. Now we have alternatives. We have built some slack into the system, some duplication. The problem is actually, in my opinion, the labor market. The labor market is extremely fragile. If you look at the labor market in the US, for example, we have a participation rate of something close to 60%, 60% of the labor force. 60% of people are working, as in, are active in the labor force, so to speak. You have an incredible 40% who are not joining the labor force. This is a dreadful statistic. And these people are partly not trained, partly not ready for the new developments, partly older who have given up. Also, a lot of them have been afflicted with this dreadful long COVID that remains and affects their productivity even if they're young. So I think we have a lot of problems in the labor market, much more than in the supply chain side of things. And
Right.
I think industrialists will probably feel that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Rabia has the question.
Yes,
thank you, Prof.
please.
Thank you, Prof, for the delivery. My worry is with respect to the inflation, particularly the increase in prices of goods and services across the world. But specifically in developing economies like we in Africa, the subsidiary effect of the global crisis has affected us. Government have to increase borrowing and lending to the manufacturing sector so as to cushion some of the effect to enable small businesses to grow. So now with respect to this increase in price as a result of the pandemic effect, is the economy going to continue this trend, or there are chances that after the adjustment, prices will reduce and return back to normal? That is my question. Maybe you need to clarify to us, please.
Yeah, thank you, Rabia. Rabia, would you like to introduce quickly for Professor Kareem?
Yeah, I am Shehu Rabia Allah, a PhD candidate at the University of Science, Malaysia. Yeah,
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Yeah.
Thank you, Rabia. No, unfortunately, I'm not so optimistic because monetary policy has reacted extremely slowly and extremely tentatively with very small interest rate increases. And inflation is going to be high for longer than they think and for higher levels than they think. I think we are going to witness an overshooting of interest rates eventually because inflation is going to remain for longer and higher. And as a result, we're going to be pushed into a recession, basically. And the world economy is going to suffer from that. Maybe the US is going to be relatively insulated. But the rest of the world won't suffer, and especially countries like my country, Egypt, is going to suffer. So.
Yeah, thank you very much, sir. Thank you. So Mr. Surab, please introduce yourself and you can ask question. Go ahead, please.
Assalamu alaikum everyone, this is Mohammad Sohrab and I'm lecturer at Ilma University, Karachi, Pakistan. Sir, you have explained things very well and I really understood what you have said about inflation. But sir, I thought it's short-term inflation. We seem that the major reasons of inflation is because of supplies or demand issue. As we've seen that there are many companies or industry being shut down because of inflation. I thought that this was because of this reason, and this inflation was for a shorter period of time. And I thought that it will be revert back if soon. If what's your opinion about that?
I think it will last for more than a year, unfortunately. And I think the shocks to developing countries like mine is going to be also from the exchange rate. So a lot of countries' exchange rates, developing countries' exchange rates are going to fall, basically. And as a result, you're going to be hit by the international rise in dollars of these supplies, but also on top of that, you're going to have your exchange rate devaluation or depreciation. And that's going to be very hard for a lot of governments in developing countries. And it's not going to go away. It's short. I mean, depends on what you define short term to be, but my prediction is that inflation is going to be with us well into next year.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. Any other question? Any participant? Over to you, Dr. Saib.
Thank you very much. Okay, please go ahead. Last question.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, please introduce yourself.
My name is Aisha Salahuddin from University of Abuja. My question is this: how can the developing countries use the fourth industrial revolution in their various endeavors? For instance, I'm in accounting, and this industrial revolution is actually needed, is very important to enhance or to promote the accounting teachings and learning. How do we go about the fourth industrial revolution? Thank you.
Well, yeah, the fourth industrial revolution has happened really quickly, accelerated by the pandemic. And as a result, we're all having to catch up with conferences online as opposed to in person. But also there's a lot of retraining of the labor force. Again, it goes back to the labor market issue that I highlighted. The labor force is going to be an issue. When you have labor participation of 60% only in a great country like the US, where education is top-notch, but not available to everybody, you need at least to retrain these 40% to get them into the labor force. It's an incredible capacity that is not being used and that is wasted. And I think also, if you see that this is happening in the United States, then it is going to be a worldwide problem. And it's a problem that developing countries better get ready for if they basically want to take advantage of the situation, in that their labor force can be ready ahead of the United States that's not preparing its labor force for the new market, for the fourth industrial revolution.
Thank you. Thanks for the response.
Okay, thank you for asking a question. And Dr. Kareem, thank you for giving answers for the questions and your comprehensive presentation. Economics is always a field we need to have years to discuss that. Even 20-minute session is not enough. But thank you so much. Yes.
Thank you.
Now we are moving towards the second keynote speech of today, Gilles Champla. Let me introduce him. Professor, are you here?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, great. Gilles is a professor of finance at Imperial College Business School and a co-director of Imperial Center for Finance and Technology. He is also a research fellow at Center National Dealer Research Scientific, a research fellow at the Center for Economic Policy Research, a senior research fellow at the Remini Center for Economic Analysis, and a member of the American Finance Association, American Economic Association, Western Finance Association, and Economic Finance Association. He is currently serving as an associate editor at the Journal of Imperial Finance. Gilles holds a PhD in economics from the London School of Economics and MSc in economics from the Paris School of Economics, and he is a graduate engineer from the École Nationale des Points. Prior to joining Imperial College, Gilles was an assistant professor of finance at the Southern School of Business, University of British Columbia. He has also worked in a corporate finance and BNP as an independent consultant for a variety of corporate, financial, and the governmental institutions and professional and international organizations. And he has served as a a board member for the prominent organizations in the world. Without taking further time, Professor, I would like to call you for your keynote address.
Thank you very much, Professor Qureshi, and thank you all for giving me the opportunity to speak today. It's a great honor to be here today, and it's also a great honor to speak after my friend Kareem Abdullah, who used to be my colleague and dear friend. So, so today I would like to tell you a little bit about how we make sense of data, how we can make sense of data in today's environment, and the number of issues that we face when thinking about data. More and more people move toward digital technologies and use data more often than human beings nowadays. And in fact, there are several instances of data-based finance for financial decisions. In particular, platform finance has become a very important aspect of corporate financing. Crowdfunding platforms of various sorts. There could be reward-based crowdfunding platforms such as Kickstarter, where essentially you can show a prototype and sell either games or technology widgets to people before you can actually deliver it to them. And so you sell that in advance, and it's a way of funding your production process. What I have shown with my former colleague, Catherine Tin, now a professor at McGill University, is that those type of crowdfunding platforms can provide a lot of extremely valuable information to entrepreneurs and to innovators. In particular, when you have a prototype of a new product, being able to crowdfund that the product gives you an opportunity to test demand, to have a proof of concept for that project. And so it's extremely valuable. We know that entrepreneurship is known to be very valuable to society because it provides a lot of experimentation. Now, one problem with entrepreneurship is that you need a lot of failed entrepreneurial ventures for a few spectacularly successful entrepreneurial ventures that become the next blue chips. With crowdfunding, that's a much smaller scale, and the type of innovation is less path-breaking than in more fundamental technologies. But so you have a prototype that is arguably a fairly minor innovation, but it's a new product. You don't quite know how well it will sell. Being able to crowdfund it will be extremely helpful. If you successfully fund your project, that means there will be enough demand for that project, and you can then move on to produce. And you are very confident you will produce and make a profit on your project. If your campaign is not successful, then that gives you an indication that the product is not going to be successful, and you can save on investment costs because you know it's not worth developing and producing the product. So for reward-based crowdfunding platforms, we have a very stable model, and actually these are the most popular platforms nowadays still. But of course, you have a lot of other types of platforms, such as, for example, lending-based platforms, or even securities-based, like equity-based platforms that are also popular. But there are different issues about those platforms. When you pre-order a product on Kickstarter, the reward-based crowdfunding platform, you only care about whether or not you like the product. Because in fact, if you don't like the product, or if not enough people like the product and the product is not produced, then you get your money back. So it's not really a concern to you how many people will like the product, except if you are very eager to buy that product. For an investment-based crowdfunding platform, such as lending-based platforms, Prosper, for example, Crowdcube in the UK for equity-based platforms. The story is very different because your valuation for a project will depend on your assessment of other people's valuation. It's going to be important for you that other people value the project. You have a signal or some personal opinion about whether the project is good or not. Other people also have other pieces of information. And so you value that. And because of that, essentially, there is what we call a common good aspect of securities-based lending. Your own valuation is not enough in your decision-making. And so based on what you expect people will do, your strategy will be different. And because of that, in bull markets, you will have a lot of successfully crowdfunded projects on lending and equity-based platforms. In a bear market, it's going to be a lot more difficult to crowdfund projects. And so you see that just like in equity markets, and perhaps even more so, because there is much less information available to investors, to would-be investors on lending platforms and equity-based platforms than for listed companies. You see that whatever you do depends on the market appetite for your companies and for our project. And so that means that the securities-based crowdfunding platform will have a cyclical component in the activity that is going to be much more spectacular than the one for reward-based projects. And so we expect reward-based crowdfunding platforms to be providing a very stable business model, in particular for those type of projects with where the main form of uncertainty is demand uncertainty. But investment-based crowdfunding platforms are expected to have a lot of hot issue markets, cold markets, pretty much like equity markets, and perhaps even more. So that's somewhere where actually maybe data is not going to help you as much as for reward-based crowdfunding platforms. So this is for like one example of modern technologies using data, where the use of data can be extremely helpful in some environments, but not help you so much for other environments. In fact, when you do an equity issue with a book building process, there is a lot of human supervision, a lot of human work. When you have to rely on standardized digital processes, it is much more complicated to really decipher the ins and outs of a company before you can invest in it. And so I think there will be a lot of issues with the investment-based crowdfunding platforms. We have already seen that in some countries like China. And I expect there will be certainly be scandals, frauds, and more regulation. And I know this is an area that is heavily looked at by regulators. But more generally, lending-based platforms can also, for example, if you look at mortgages, now in the US, mortgages are mostly operated by fintech companies that rely on data. And so there again, there is a problem. There is a distinction between what humans can do and what data can do. Okay, so if you apply for a mortgage in the US on Quicken Loans, for example, you have a response in a few minutes. And this is very good, except that to get this response, Quicken Loans uses data on where you live, what you do, a lot of data on everything you do, including non-financial data. And because of that, some recent research shows that there can be more discrimination, statistical discrimination, when you use data than if you rely on human loan officers. Essentially, depending on where you live, if you are in a rich area, for example, you are a young graduate, if you live in a rich area, it is more costly, but it's also going to be a lot easier for you to have a good mortgage than if you live in a not as good area. And so, of course, that leads to the type of discrimination that human loan officers wouldn't rely on. And there are a lot of issues like this. Now, to finish, the last argument I would like to discuss is more fundamentally, what kind of causal inference can you derive from data? We know we've known for centuries that when we observe on data is really a correlation, is a relationship between data. And so if you have a business as usual, a standard process, and you can observe past data and the only thing that matters to you is prediction, then maybe correlations are enough. But still, there are a lot of correlations that are so-called spurious correlations. And the famous one is countries that have more Nobel laureates tend to consume more chocolate. Of course, it doesn't mean that you have to eat more chocolate to increase your chance of having a Nobel Prize. It doesn't mean either that if you see that a country has a Nobel laureate, you should ship a lot of chocolate to sell to those countries. In fact, the more likely explanation is that these are rich countries that consume more chocolate and have better education and research. So, of course, this is nearly like a funny example, but there are many instances where if you just use statistics without thinking of where the data generating process comes from and to which extent it is endogenous and why people made the decisions they made, you could really make wrong decisions. You could make wrong regulatory decisions, and you could also give wrong advice to CFOs and CEOs. And so just to give you a few examples, there are several reasons for that. One is that empiricists and people doing data work cannot observe expectations of agents. And because of that, they cannot really see why people made those decisions and what they believed when they made these decisions. Another and final example is that we are talking in a world where a lot of CEOs and CFOs have private information about the firm. And so they are very much aware that when they make a decision, it can carry a signal content to investors and other parties. And because of that, they are very aware that whatever decision they will make will have an informational content that will be important to take into account. Now, of course, this is a signaling, this carries a signaling content because it is a discretionary decision. And in fact, a lot of empiricists nowadays use random assignment where you replicate the medical randomized controlled trial system, methodology to economics and finance. But in fact, when you do so, you actually miss the selection component where people make discretionary decisions based on the information they have. And that can lead to very wrong advice. So, for example, if you just use random assignments to inform someone about whether or not they should issue equity, you will definitely give a wrong advice compared to looking at why people issue equity, for example, to invest in good projects. And so, in fact, comparative economic systems and comparative financial systems very much look into to which extent planned economies differ from economies where people make free discretionary decisions. And so from that point of view, you cannot, in economics and finance, use data and information observation using random assignments, which is close to planned economy to some extent. You randomly assign people to some roles, and then give advice to people in a world where they make free discretionary decisions. A lot of economics is about the distinction between the two, and so you cannot use empirical evidence using random assignment very easily in order to inform people about discretionary decisions they make. And that's the subject of the paper published a few months ago in the Journal of Financial Economics with my co-author, Christopher Hennes. And you asked me for a short presentation, so I did a short presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, Professor. Yes, now the session is open for the questions. We have 5 minutes for the question answer session.
Okay, so let me start with the one quick question. Thank you very much, Professor Gills. It's again what you have mentioned in the last part of your presentation, the matter of reliability of the data. I am concerned more about the strategists or analysts who are living in the developing countries, LDCs, mostly the data is not available, and if it is available, it is not reliable. So normally they ends up with just try to simulate the American available data based on the variables parameter they derive from there. Again, it is what you said, the spurious correlations or other issues are there, and in the end, what we are going to decide, it is all engineered, or the results are not the truly data driven, what the result that we want to get. So the countries, LDCs, what data they can use and how they can have the access to the reliable data?
In fact, I think it can be, to some extent, of course, there are many things you can do with data, but it can also be a blessing to not have data. In fact, when people have too much data, they are obsessed with finding data, pulling them together, using past information. To some extent, it is nearly a tax on their time, on their innovative power. And so to some extent, let me give you an example based on education. A lot of education systems nowadays and access to higher education rely on platforms. And so one essential factor of selection is grades. But the grades depend so much on which school you're in, which instructor you have, maybe your personal circumstances, that actually I am convinced, and I know how inefficient those platforms, these education platforms are. I am convinced that someone who starts a school and takes the time to look at application with a fresh human eye can easily outperform those platforms that select a large quantity of applications with very simple and overly simple algorithms. So I am convinced that you can do a lot more without data. It can be a blessing because instead of looking at data, you will do things with a human and fresh eye.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Professor, thank you very much for the presentation. And in case if nobody is having a question, we can move further. But Mohammed, yes, quick question, please.
Thank you, sir. So my name is Mohammed Sohrab, and I'm lecturer at Ilma University. Sir, you have explained importance of data in a very good manner, but one thing I would like to mention here is that we should use standardized practices so that we should have accurate data, because reporting or analysis is totally depend on the accuracy of the data. Once we have accurate data, then we can make accurate analysis, because there are many things which were used to manipulate data. Some are done with mistakenly, but some are done with intentionally. Some are done with intentionally. So I thought that importance of data is as necessary as its accuracy is necessary.
I think
so
this
I agree with
question
you.
has been answered already.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead, Doctor. Yeah. Go ahead, Dr. Gill.
So in fact, I was about to say, I agree with what you say, but I think deep down, of course, you need to make sure your data is accurate, but more importantly, you need to understand where the data comes from, why you observe the data as it is. And so maybe that is a difference with statistical approaches and economic approaches. Economists care a lot about the endogeneity of the data generating process. And that has an explanatory power that is very useful for business and society. But of course, yes, of course, then those data also have to be reliable for you to use them. But don't worry, even if you don't have reliable data, there are a lot of opportunities.
Thank you, sir. You explained it very well. I really appreciate your words. Really, that means that accuracy of analysis is totally depend on the accuracy of our data. Thank you, sir.
Yes, Mohammed, thank you so much. And Professor Gibbs, thank you so much for this detailed presentation.
Thank you.
Without taking further time, I would like to move to the next presenter. And we will not be having a liberty of asking questions because it's a recorded presentation. Reason being, at this point in time where the speaker is, it's 3 a.m. in the morning. Lori Beslow. She is an internationally recognized expert in the teaching and learning in the higher education. Her work focuses on pedagogical, curricular, and digital innovations and how they strengthen student learning. She founded the Teaching and the Learning Laboratory at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and served there for 20 years as director. She designed, implemented, and supervised over 80 research studies at MIT on educational change and advancement. She led a collaboration between the MIT and researchers at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, where they produced some of the earliest findings on the MOOCs, which is very common nowadays. That research was presented in the President's Council of the Advisors in the Scientific Technology in US. And she is a senior lecturer at MIT Sloan School of Management. She also teaches in TLL's Teaching Certificate Program, which has educated over 2,500 MIT PhD students and postdoctoral associates in the university level teaching and learning. And she was director for the center also. Wasim, if you can kindly play the presentation. However, in case if you will be having any kind of questions, please put that into the chat box because when Professor Laurie is going to join us, he will be responding back to those questions.
Good morning or good afternoon, whatever it is at the place that you're watching this. I'm sorry that we can't be all together, and I'm particularly disappointed that I won't be available to answer questions or hear your comments after this brief presentation. But I think that you're watching this when it's 3 o'clock in the morning in Boston. I will have a slide at the end of the presentation with my email address, and I would be very happy to answer questions or read your comments if you want to contact me. I would, before I begin, like to thank the GCBMS organizers for inviting me to speak. The title of my talk is Seeing the Glass Half Full, 3 Promising Trends in Education. Now, I grew up in the suburbs outside of New York City, and stereotypically, New Yorkers are not known for their optimism. That is certainly true in my case. I mention this because you would think that these last 2 years and current events that are going on now would only reinforce my negative worldview. But I have seen developments in education that can only be described as promising over these last 2 years. These are the 3 trends that I'll be talking about. Attitudes toward teaching online are more positive. Alternative credentials are gaining favor. And research is helping us understand how best to use digital tools. I call these promising because they represent activities, perspectives, strategies adopted during the pandemic that I believe can serve as a foundation for longer lasting change. You might notice that they all relate to teaching and learning in higher education or lifelong learning. That's because that's what I do research in, but more importantly, that's where my passion lies. And so I will be focusing on these 2 segments during the talk. Before I describe the first of the 3 trends, I'd like to share a short video that for me captures learning in real time. The video was recorded during a course in first-year physics at MIT that takes place in what we call the TEAL classroom. TEAL stands for Technology-Enabled Active Learning. About 20 years ago, a group of MIT faculty moved teaching introductory physics from the lecture hall to a classroom where you'll see students sitting at tables actually doing physics, whether that's a desktop experiment, analyzing some data, or working on a problem. What you'll see after a shot of the teal classroom is a student working with a professor and a classmate on a concept that had been confusing him, and you'll see the light bulb go on as he gets it.
It's already been calibrated. Every time there's a voltage measurement, it calibrated it, and it prints out your speed or your, it actually doesn't do angular frequency, it does divided by our outer squared minus our inner squared.
Oh, and you count, because you do the difference of squares and cancel those out.
That's it.
Wow.
Okay.
Even though I've seen this video many times, when the student says, wow, I still get chills up and down my spine. And I show you this because I think that's a goal we can all work toward, whether we are formal or informal teachers, to create situations in which students have those aha moments, whether they're trying to master a concept or a new skill, and whether they're working in the classroom or working online. So with that, let me move to my first promising trend, which is attitudes toward teaching online are more positive. These are data that were collected by Bayview Analytics. They're an educational research consulting firm. They surveyed respondents at 3 points of time, April, August, and December of 2020. These data are from that final December 2020 survey. They asked faculty and administrators in higher ed in the US whether they were more optimistic, more pessimistic, or saw no change in their attitudes toward digital materials and online learning. And as you can see, over 50% of those respondents said that they were more optimistic. This mirrors my own experiences in teaching over the past couple of years. When we first went online, I was absolutely terrified to be teaching over Zoom. By the time I got back into the classroom in fall of 2021, not only was I much more comfortable with digital materials, but I understood how to bring them into the classroom, to use them so that they did, in fact, contribute to my students' learning. There was also an unintended consequence of the pandemic. In the spring of 2020, the senior administration at the Sloan School of Management began a set of town halls so that faculty and staff could come together, talk about the challenges of teaching, talk about effective strategies, what was working for them. We had over 100 attendees at those town halls. Now, I've been working in teaching and learning at MIT for over 25 years, and I can say I have never seen so much interest in teaching as I saw in those groups. Let me now move to the second promising trend, which is that alternative credentials are gaining favor. I'm using the term alternative credentials very broadly to mean anything besides a 2 or 4 year college degree. They can be certificates, they can be online courses, badges. In the States, we have seen partnerships between companies and universities to create some of these materials with good effect. I want to show you 3 pieces of data that I think make the case that this kind of education is mushrooming. The first is from the IMS Global Consortium. They simply went out and counted the number of badges available to potential learners, And you can see that they moved from 24 million in 2018 to 43 million in 2020. Similarly, the acceptance of employers in using these credentials for hiring and promotion has increased. So 40% in 2013 and 70% in 2021. This is research done by EdSurge, which is a educational publishing company in the US. And finally, the Strata Center for Educational Consumer Insights has found that 40% of working age adults have completed one non-degree credential as of July 2021. And interestingly, of that 40%, 20% said that was the highest level of education that they have attained. Now, when I talk about alternate credentials, I'm very often asked whether or not I think that they will supplant traditional 2 or 4 year colleges, and I can say that I don't think that that's the case. I was involved in the inception of edX in 2012, and I can tell you that this was a question swirling around the campus at that time. Senior administrators, faculty were concerned that we might be eating our lunch by launching edX, and certainly the intervening 10 years have shown that that is not the case. I do think that in the immediate future, alternative credentials will remain an important resource in the tech and business sectors. But out of curiosity in preparing for this talk, I went to the Coursera website to see what their most popular courses are currently. Python and machine learning are certainly at the top, but so are the science of well-being, learning how to learn, and English for career development, so that we're moving beyond the tech and business. I think that can only be a good thing. The last important trend that I see is the expansion of research into online teaching and learning, which was accelerated by the challenges of the pandemic. The pandemic also provided researchers with an abundance of natural experiments that they could use to further our understanding. Ironically, I'm going to present a study from 2010 that was done under the auspices of the US Department of Education. The researchers compared online courses with face-to-face courses, the same material and the same kinds of students. And what they found was that there was no difference in learning gains between online and face-to-face. Where they did see a slight bump in learning was in the use of blended learning. Here's a quote from that study. The only studies that were significant statistically were those contrasting blending learning with traditional face-to-face instruction. I know that many of you are from the business world, and so I thought that you would be interested in these data, which underscore that point. When edX and Coursera were begun, McKinsey started its own online platform called the McKinsey Academy. These are completion rates for their first 5 courses, and as you can see, the lowest is 90%. This is at the same time that we were seeing persistent rates, completion rates for the MOOCs in the single digits. And what I think unites this finding with the US Department of Education research is that in both cases there was a combination of online resources with a social component. The McKinsey Academy participants were either studying with colleagues or they had taken the course because they were encouraged by their manager. this is where I think research can make a contribution in helping us to understand how online resources and social interactions can be combined to benefit the learner, understanding that there will be different learners and different learning objectives. I know, of course, that the pandemic has had dire consequences for all levels of education in every country worldwide. But paradoxically, these last 2 years have also had unexpected benefits in education because they have allowed us to experiment with different modes of education, create different kinds of educational technology tools, invent different uses for technology, and perhaps most importantly, reach groups of learners that we haven't been able historically to reach previously. To build on, to extend these 3 trends that I've talked about today, to help them reach their full potential, we're going to have to invest money, time, and political will. But I have faith that we can do that, even if I am a New Yorker. Here's how to get in touch with me. Again, I hope that we can continue the conversation. Thank you so much for listening.
Dr. Tai?
Yes, Professor.
Just go ahead.
Yes. Let me thank Laurie, although she is not here, but she has contributed into a department who produced more than 2,500 PhDs at MIT. That's really a splendid contribution from her side into the academics sector. Now, last but not the least, Professor George Yip. Professor, are you there? Fantastic. So let me introduce you to the audience. Professor George Yip is the Fellow of Academy of International Business, Emeritus Professor of Marketing and Strategy at Imperial College Business School in London, Distinguished Professor at Northeastern University in Boston, USA, and he is also serving as Editorial Advisory Board member of California Management Review and MIT's Sloan Management Review. He's an author and the co-author for Pioneers, Hidden Champions, Change, Innovation, China Next Strategic Advantage, From Limitation to Innovation, Strategic Transformation, Managing Global Customers, Asian Advantages, Key Strategies for Winning in the Asia-Pacific region, and the Total Global Strategy, volumes of books and other scripts. And he has contributed a lot into the academic sector while teaching to the students. He supervised research and has done multiple projects in the research field. Without taking further time, Professor, I would like to invite you to deliver your keynote.
Thank you. Good morning or good afternoon to you. I'm calling from Boston. We're at 6:40 in the morning. Can you see my screen, my visuals? Yes? Can you see?
Not yet, Professor.
Yes, sir. Yes, okay. We can see.
You can see?
Yes, we can. Right. Yes, go ahead.
All right. So my topic is the future of global supply chains in a pandemic and decoupling world. Just to set this up, this is the kind of complex global operations, assembly operations that companies have had. And this in fact is BMW some time ago. So it's pretty hard to manage your supply chain. And in this kind of supply situation, they need seamless global delivery and service. Now, life has got much more complicated. In the early days of international business, companies were what you might call internationalists. They had a home business, and the blue dots are the export operations. So it's just a single lane supply chain. Most manufacturing was done within the home business. All the supply chain was within the home business. And so not that much potential disruption. Any disruption would have been to single subsidiaries, right? Not a global disruption. Then over time, they became what we call the federalists, the classic multinational company, Nestle, Unilever, where a lot of the manufacturing was now done in the local subsidiary. So to some extent, even less potential for supply chain disruption, or at least it would be done regionally, and the center becomes more of a holding company. So this actually is an evolution that's taken place over 100 years, because the early multinationals started out even in 1900, and the previous export model was from the 1900s. Then after the First World War, this federalist model continuing really for a long time, until starting in the 1990s, which is when I started work on global strategy, that companies moved to this next model that I and my colleague Jose de la Torre, who was at UCLA, called the global network maximizer. And this is where global supply chain problems really become serious, because now almost no single country controls everything or manufactures everything. And we have this tremendous network effect. Now, this is very efficient, but you can also see how this has huge potential for disruption. And just to give you one illustration, look at the Airbus 320. Each color is a different country. And this is just, on this map, it shows 4 European countries: France, Germany, UK, and Spain. That's on the diagram. On the bigger map, you can see that there are 4 final assembly lines in the USA, in France and Germany, and in China as well. Again, huge potential for supply chain disruption in the manufacturing. At least in the final delivery, the one advantage of an airplane is that it delivers itself, unlike nearly every other product. So now let's move on to the disruptions. I'm going to talk about both the short term and the long term. Oh, sorry, and this is moving an Airbus component. In the end, some of the movement has to be done by trucks, and we even have disruptions with truckers blocking the capital of Canada because of complaints about COVID vaccinations, and now there's truckers blocking Paris, truckers moving in on Washington, DC. Now, I'm going to talk about recent short-term global supply chain disruptions and then long-term ones as well. Of course, we have COVID, and even though COVID is ending, there may be another pandemic, and in fact, COVID seems to be picking up again in China, so China's shutting down again. Last year, we had the Suez Canal blockage, a very narrow waterway that I've actually sailed through myself twice on a ship. You need only one accident to really block up supply chain. Then there was the temporary shutdown last year of China's second largest container port, and now we have Russia's war in Ukraine, and I put that in the short-term global supply chain disruption optimistically. Let's all pray that this will end soon. In the longer term, we have Brexit as a very dramatic example of disruption of supply chains within Europe, and who knows when this might happen to other trade blocs as well. And then, very importantly, we have this trade conflict between China and the USA, and that is leading to decoupling. So let me talk about a couple of these in more detail. First of all, COVID, and we can use COVID as an example of a short-term, very severe supply chain disruption that may have long-term implications. And think about how companies, what the reaction is going to be. When we consider whether COVID and future pandemics will have a permanent effect on the strategies of multinational companies, the answer depends, of course, on how long it lasts, as well as the continuing threat of future pandemics. And the effects on globalization strategies come via 4 mechanisms: the behavior of national governments, the attitudes of consumers, the mindset of executives and key stakeholders, and the economics of business globalization. Now, first of all, in terms of governments, before COVID, China had put itself forward as the champion of free trade at the World Economic Forum in Davos 3 years ago. Many observers were surprised, but in the history of international trade, it has always been the country with international competitive advantages that has adopted this attitude. First, it was Britain, then the United States, and now it's the turn of China. However, some national governments may use COVID as an excuse to pull back from multilateralism and free trade, leaving them in an interesting position with voters. That's because voters may be against free trade in theory, but they support it with their wallets when they shop. Walmart, the largest retail chain in the USA, continues to source 70 to 80% of its products from Chinese suppliers. Occasional calls for boycotts have gone nowhere for bans, and this is unlikely to change when people's main focus for purchasing is on price and value. Then when we look at global supply chain trade-offs, for multinational companies, it's a straightforward choice between commitment and flexibility. A commitment to a specialized supply chain that is low cost, but also provides the required high quality levels, yields the greatest short-term profit. But this strategy, of course, poses high risks, especially in the face of so-called black swan disruptions like COVID. So all companies should build in some duplication and flexibility in their global supply chains, including to guard against putting themselves into bad bargaining positions. So the cost of duplication and flexibility, however, can be high, and companies have to sacrifice short-term profit margins for long-term security. Now, the manager or director charged with designing and running a global supply chain is always under huge profit pressure to deliver in the cheapest and most efficient way. This profit pressure continues up the hierarchy all the way to the chief executive, and then top-down pressure to cut costs is often the reason attributed to many flaws in supply chains, such as the BP Deepwater Horizon oil spill in 2010. So in the end, it's probably only boards of directors who can supply counter pressures for more flexible and secure supply chains. But companies that sacrifice short-term profits with greater long-term security then suffer the risk of hostile takeovers. Did my slides move or not? Are we seeing the next one?
Yeah, no, actually, we can see the shorter version of the slides. You have to zoom out.
I've zoomed out.
You zoomed out. You have to zoom in.
Can you see this one? 3 Chinese objectives to decoupling.
Yeah, no, it's fine, sir. No, it's fine.
That's fine. Okay, sorry about that.
Okay.
So the example of the other big one is, what has China been doing? They're trying to eliminate dependence on foreign countries and corporations for critical technology and products. They are trying to facilitate the domestic dominance of local indigenous firms, and they're leveraging that dominance into global competitiveness. The first 2 channels are what they call internal dual circulation, and the third one is what they call external dual circulation. Now, what are the China mechanisms for decoupling their supply chains? One is purchase and investment. The Made in China 2025 plan, launched in 2015, states that the central government will support enterprises to perform mergers, equity investment, and venture capital investment overseas to reduce China's dependence on foreign-owned technology. In 2016, already the value of Chinese acquisitions of US firms grew 376% to about 55 billion, prompting the US Committee on Foreign Investment and other agencies to scrutinize acquisitions on national security grounds. Secondly, subsidies and funding. For Made in China 2025, the government has set aside more than $500 billion in various funds to support local R&D and technologies and products for which China currently depends on foreign companies. Right? Some of these include special construction funds, development of semiconductor capabilities, and so on. Thirdly, extraction. An investigation by the US Trade Representative determined that China uses foreign ownership restrictions, such as joint venture requirements and foreign equity limitations, and various administrative review and licensing processes to acquire or pressure technology transfer from US companies. China, of course, disputes this, but that is what is considered. Now, what should foreign companies do? And we can look at 4 types of foreign companies in China. The below the radar companies, these have a low focus on both upstream and downstream. Upstream being supply chain and downstream being market activities. German company like medical device maker for seniors, but these are, the odds of surviving in China are low because China doesn't account for a lot of their sales, and because its products sit in the target of Made in China 2025, this company could easily lose ground to Mindray, the national champion. Secondly, upstream players, those who primarily manufacture in China, have their supply chain in China. Over the past 20 years, China has been extraordinarily successful in attracting upstream players. Now, there are two dangers for upstream players. One is US tariffs or tariffs in the European Union or other countries, and they're going to start blocking supplies from China. And then now we see that China, ironically, is more sensitive, more vulnerable to COVID, because China is putting in more lockdowns. So being just dependent on China is now a bigger risk for upstream players who are sourcing entirely from China. Then there are market players who are being challenged in China. I won't talk about that because my focus here is on supply chain, and the same thing for dual players. So the message here in terms of supply chain is that while China has demonstrated itself, established itself as the superior, far superior supplier in many categories, including where they really have the world's only engineers who are capable in many manufacturing categories. Short-term disruptions from pandemics, from wars, from breakdowns in shipping, such as the Suez Canal, make companies very vulnerable. So really, the answer is that you need to diversify yourself much more rather than being dependent on one single country or even region, because even if you diversify to other countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, they still have to go through sailing choke points, such as the Malacca Straits near Singapore, or even if they diversify to the Middle East, where many of you are from, there's another choke point through the Suez Canal, and going in the other direction, there's the potential choke point of the Panama Canal, which hasn't happened yet. The world somehow wasn't designed very sensibly for the security of global supply chains. I'm going to finish up with a slide on how things are changing now because of digitization. Digitization has really taken off and is helping the with global supply chains. And a new book out by Namsan and Liu, out right now, The Digital Multinational, you can read it at the bottom there. And you can be tightly coupled, highly integrate, using digital to integrate with the home country and limited local autonomy. On the far right of the top row, you can be decoupled, disaggregated with significant local autonomy, or you can be loosely coupled. And the nice thing about digitization is that it also makes the management of global supply chains much easier. So I think that's all the time that I have. Do you have any comments, Dr. Azim, or questions for me?
Thank you very much, Dr. George. It was great. In fact, I had already made one question to the first keynote speaker based on my hypothesis about the role of free trade zone to moderate the relationship between the impact of the COVID and its impact on the supply chain driven cost push and inflation. So, but here in your presentation, it's give me new insight, because supply chain is not, this is not something that we can avoid. Supply chain will be there, even the free trade zone is wider or it is shorter, it doesn't matter.
Actually, thank you. Actually, we have a question from, is it from Senegal in Africa? I suddenly realized that perhaps Africa is very well placed to be the world's next supply chain, because they can export across the Atlantic to the USA, up the Atlantic to Europe, and through the Indian Ocean to some of Asia anyway, without facing some of these choke points. So I'd love to see, of course, Africa play a much bigger role in global supply chains, and that perhaps is the next opportunity.
Thank you, sir.
I think there's a question from Dr. Muhammad Surab.
Yeah, Muhammad Surab.
Yeah, Dr. Muhammad, a quick question, please.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, sir. Sir, as you mentioned that after a few years, as you mentioned that China is reducing its dependency on other countries. So that means in future there will be somehow low or less value of supply chain, because as we know that there is a huge dependency, there is a huge trade between China and other countries. If China reduce its dependency on other countries, then and everything they manufacture within the country, then definitely it will hit supply chain as well.
Yes, let me be a bit clear about that. The China dependency is more for critical components such as semiconductors. In terms of raw materials, China will still be very dependent on other countries because China has very little in the way of raw materials relative to its population. So China is focusing on key limited components, and vice versa. The West is very dependent on China for some, rare earths and so on, but also on China's manufacturing capability.
Okay.
So
thank you, sir. I got it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor George. Let me extend thanks to all the keynote speakers, Professor Kareem, Professor Gills, Professor Breslow, and Professor George. You have given a wonderful keynote addresses to all of us, and definitely we'll have to go one more time to the recording to see the insights of the content and inside of the perspective that you've given. And currently at this point of time, as the academic sector and the industries are asking their employees, students, and the interns to come back to the premises. So hopefully we are going to have next session on site, considering that shift. But till that, we are going to get the benefit of this online platform where we get the recorded session available for the people to watch later. Once again, thank you so much, everyone, for attending the inaugural session of the conference. And we have 20 minutes networking session now. I will invite Mr. Wasim to give us orientation how to do networking effectively. And then after 20 minutes, exact at 3:20 UAE Dubai time, we are going to have session 1. And session 1 will be having 3 themes. The first one is a human resource management, and the second one is entrepreneurship, and the third one is finance and accounting. And kindly, you will be requested to join your respective sessions as a speaker. And those people who would like to attend as participant, they can pick any session what they like for them or what they think is appropriate. And the recording will be forwarded to all the participants later. And in case if you are joining one session, don't worry, you will be having a chance to review the recording later for the other sessions, our themes. So I wish you a good day ahead. Looking forward to see you in the first session. Mr. Wasim, if you are there, kindly, kindly.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tahir. Thank you very much, Dr. Azim, and all the respected keynote speakers and the presenters for coming. The networking session is very simple. I'll be doing this. I'll be dividing everyone into a group of 5 each so that you can have an interaction with each other. So please, when you go into the breakout rooms, I request everyone to please be as much participative as possible and interact with each other. Try to know others, their areas, because the purpose of the conference is to have these international networking. So I'm going to divide everyone into 5 sessions. And after 20 minutes, then I'll be making these themes 1, 2, and 3. And then everyone according to your presentation or your choice, just go to the presentation, whichever you like to go to. Okay, so now I'm creating it. You'll be receiving a message.
So